You kissed me. I'm aware.
I'm
In front of 40 people who would kill to know my name.
In front of 40 people who would kill to know my name.
I said I was sorry.
I said I was sorry.
You said it was an emergency. It was. Jeon Siwon set down his glass with the particular patience of a man who had never once in his life needed to raise his voice to be the most dangerous presence in a room. He looked at the woman standing in front of him, bruised pride, straight spine, not a single tremor in her hands, and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Curiosity.
What were you running
he said
from?
slowly. Were you running from?
Running from.
Zola Amani Davis looked him dead in the eye and said, None of your business. He almost smiled. Almost. You are standing in my penthouse, he said, at 2 a.m, surrounded by men who answer only to me. He tilted his head slightly. Everything in this room is my business. She held his gaze without blinking. Then I guess, she said quietly, we have a problem. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said, we have a deal. You're flat on the 3rd bar. Zola Amani Davis pulled the microphone away from her lips and stared into the darkness of the sound booth. Excuse me? The 3rd bar of the 2nd verse. Minjun's voice crackled through the monitor speaker. You're rushing it. I've been singing since I was 6 years old, Minjun. And yet, 3rd bar, 2nd verse. She exhaled through her nose, counted to 3 the way her mother had taught her, and lifted the microphone again. The opening notes of the song rolled through the booth like smoke, slow, deliberate, a little dangerous. That was the only kind of music Club Obsidian wanted. The underground venue didn't book performers for cheerful. It booked them for feeling. Zola had plenty of that. She finished the sound check without another comment from Minjun, collected her coat from the back room, and stepped into the main floor of Club Obsidian 2 hours before doors opened. The place was all dark wood and amber light, the kind of venue that felt like a secret, even when it was packed. She liked it here. Seoul had been good to her, quiet in the ways that mattered, loud in the ways she needed. She had been here 4 months, long enough to build a routine, short enough that nobody knew her full name. That was the point. She ordered water from the bar, sat on a stool, and ran through her set list in her head. 7 songs, 2 originals, 1 Billie Holiday cover that always made the room go still. She had learned, performing in underground spaces across 3 countries, that silence was the greatest compliment an audience could give you. Not applause. Silence meant they forgot to breathe. By 10 o'clock, the club was full. Zola performed from the small, elevated stage at the far end of the room, a single spotlight catching the deep brown of her skin, the slow way she moved when the music took over. She didn't perform for audiences. She performed with them, pulling the room into something private and shared at the same time. It was the thing she did best. She was midway through her 5th song when she saw him. The crowd shifted slightly near the entrance, the way crowds always shifted when someone important walked in, without knowing why they were moving. Instinctive. Cellular. Zola had seen that kind of entrance before in London, in Paris, in Accra. Men who occupied space differently from everyone else. She didn't let it break her performance. She finished the song, took her bow to applause that rattled the glasses on the bar, and stepped off stage for her 15-minute break. She was reaching for the glass of water a staff member had left at the edge of the stage when the room rearranged itself around a single table near the wall, and she saw him properly. He was seated alone, which was unusual enough. What was more unusual was that no one was sitting at any of the 4 tables immediately surrounding his. Not because they were reserved. There were no reserved signs. People had, simply unconsciously, left a perimeter. He was looking at nothing in particular, one hand resting on the table, his expression entirely absent of anything resembling emotion. Dark suit. Stillness that felt almost architectural. Zola looked away. If you made it this far, you already know this story is different. Welcome to the channel. This is where dark romance lives, where forbidden love hits different, and where the stories don't play it safe. Now I need to know. Be honest in the comments. When Zola grabbed that stranger and kissed him, were you thinking girl, run, or girl, stay? Because that man at that table is not the kind of trouble you walk away from easily. Drop your answer below. I'm reading every single one. Also, where are you watching from? Drop your city, your country. And if you want to find out exactly what happens after Zola looks away from that table, subscribe right now. The story is just getting started, and you do not want to miss what comes next. She was threading through the crowd toward the back hallway when she heard it. A voice behind her that turned her blood to ice water. Zola. Low. Familiar. The particular brand of gentle that she had learned too late meant the opposite of what it sounded like. She stopped walking. Her fingers went numb around the water glass. Don't turn around. Don't turn around. Think. The crowd pressed around her, oblivious. The next performer was already doing a sound check on stage. If she ran for the back hallway, Marcus would follow. If she ran for the exit, he'd catch her before she reached the street. He was faster than he looked. She knew that better than anyone. She had 3 seconds before he reached her. Her eyes landed on the nearest person. The man from the solitary table had apparently stood to speak to someone. He was close now, closer than she'd realized, a foot away at most, his attention directed sideways. Zola took 1 step forward, put her hand on the side of his face, and kissed him. The noise of the club seemed to compress into something very small and very far away. He didn't move. He didn't pull back. He didn't kiss her back. He simply went very, very still, the way a predator goes still, not from shock, but from calculation. Zola held the kiss for 3 seconds, 4, 5. Then she pulled back. His eyes were on her, black, completely unreadable, and carrying the particular quality of a man who had never been surprised by anything in his life, and had just, possibly, been surprised. "Interesting choice," he said. His voice was quiet enough that she almost didn't hear it over the music. She turned her head slightly. Marcus was gone, swallowed back into the crowd, or heading for the exit, or simply biding his time. It didn't matter. She'd bought herself a window. She turned back to the man in front of her. He was still looking at her. Around them, Zola became slowly aware that no one in the immediate vicinity was talking anymore. 2 large men in dark clothing had appeared from somewhere and were standing at a respectful but unmistakable distance, watching her with expressions she couldn't read. "I'm sorry," she said. "Are you?" he said. It wasn't a question. It was an emergency. "So I gathered." He looked at her for another moment. Then he turned back to the man he had been speaking to and said something in Korean she didn't catch. Zola took that as her dismissal and walked steadily to the back hallway. She did not run. Running was for people who had already lost. She sat in the back room for 10 minutes, hands wrapped around her water glass. telling herself her heart rate was completely normal. It was not. She was packing up after her last set at midnight when Min-jun appeared in the doorway of the back room, wearing an expression she had never seen on him before. He was a composed man by nature. 12 years managing underground venues had given him the kind of unflappable quality that was almost meditative. He looked flapped. "Zola," he said carefully, "there are some men outside who would like to speak to you." She didn't look up from her bag. "Tell them I don't do private bookings. These are not—" He paused. "These are not the kind of men you tell things to." She looked up then. The two men from the club floor were standing in the corridor behind Min-jun. They were polite about it. They didn't touch her, didn't threaten her, simply indicated with professional calm that a car was waiting and that it would be in her best interest to get into it. She thought about saying no. She thought about what they would do if she said no. She got into the car. The penthouse was on the 53rd floor of a building that didn't appear on any of the tourist maps Zola had consulted when she'd first arrived in Seoul. It was the kind of address that existed for people who had no need to be found. The man from the club was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window when she was brought in, his back to her, looking out over Seoul the way people looked at things they owned. "Sit down," he said, without turning. "I'd rather stand." A pause. "Suit yourself." He turned then, and in the full light of the penthouse, she could see him clearly for the first time. He was younger than she had initially estimated, early 30s perhaps, sharp-featured. There was something almost formal about the way he held himself, as though he had learned stillness as a discipline. "My name is Jeon Siwon," he said. "I own 6 businesses in Seoul and interests across 12 countries. I am also the reason that 40% of what moves through this city's underground economy moves at all." Zola looked at him steadily. "Is there a point coming?" "The man who was following you tonight," he said. "He will not stop because you kissed a stranger. That kind of man doesn't stop." She said nothing. "I'm offering you an arrangement," Siwon continued. "You stay here, under this roof, under my protection. You attend certain public functions as my companion. In exchange, your problem disappears." "I don't have a problem," Zola said. "I handled it." "You delayed it." "Same thing." "It is not the same thing." He said it without heat, without impatience. A simple correction, like adjusting a number in a column. One is a solution. The other is borrowed time. Zola set her bag down on the chair she had declined to sit in, because her arms were tired, and her hands needed something to do. "I appreciate the offer, and I'm sorry for what I did tonight, kissing you without asking. That was wrong of me, and I shouldn't have done it, but I don't need your help," tilted his head slightly. "What you need and what is happening are 2 different things. I can take care of myself. I don't doubt it." He picked up a glass from the side table and looked into it for a moment. "That isn't the point." "Then what is the point?" "The point," he said, "is that you kissed me in a room full of people who pay very close attention to what I do, and who I do it with. Whatever your reasons were, and you're not obligated to share them. The fact exists. The interpretation of that fact is now in motion. The simplest way to manage the interpretation is to manage the context." Zola stared at him. "You want me to pretend to be your— what, exactly?" "Companion. It's a functional arrangement, not a romantic one. And if I say no?" For the first time, something moved across his face. Not quite amusement, not quite warning. "Then you're free to go," he said. and you handle your problem on your own. And in 2 or 3 weeks, when it becomes clear that you haven't handled it, you'll have fewer options than you have right now." He wasn't threatening her. That was the thing that unsettled her most. There was no threat in his voice, no pressure, no edge. He was simply telling her the shape of reality as he understood it, the way someone might describe the weather. Zola looked around the room, at the 2 men standing near the door, at the city sprawled below the windows like something conquered. She thought about Marcus's voice saying her name in that crowd, the specific texture of it, the patience in it. Zola, like he had all the time in the world, like he had always known he'd find her. "Fine," she said. The word tasted like ash. "But I have conditions." Siwon looked at her in surprise. "Of course you do," he said. Her room was larger than her entire apartment in London had been. Zola stood in the middle of it the next morning and felt the particular suffocating quality of beautiful things you haven't chosen for yourself. The bed was enormous. The window looked out over the Han River. There were fresh flowers on the side table, which she found deeply irritating for reasons she couldn't fully articulate. A knock at the door. She opened it to find a Korean woman about her age. Sharp eyes, hair pulled back, the bearing of someone who had never wasted a movement in her life. "I'm Han Bora," the woman said. "Mr. Jeon's chief of operations. I'll go over the arrangements." Zola leaned against the doorframe. "Sure." Bora produced a small card, actual cardstock, printed, which Zola found almost charmingly formal given the circumstances, and began going through it. Zola was not to leave the building unaccompanied. She was not to make contact with anyone outside without going through Bora first. She was not to access certain floors of the building. She was not to discuss the nature of her presence here with anyone. "Breakfast is served at 7 and 9, Bora finished. "Mr. Jeon prefers silence before 10 in the morning. There is a music room on the 14th floor. You may use it." "How generous," Zola said. Bora looked at her with the expression of someone filing information away for later, not hostile, assessing. "Do you have questions?" "About 400, Zola said pleasantly. "But I'll start with one. How long does he expect this to last?" "That depends on the circumstances." "That's not an answer." "No," Bora agreed, without apology, and left. Zola looked down at the card. Then she went and found the music room, because if she was going to be caged, she was at least going to be caged somewhere with a piano. She broke the first rule before 9 o'clock by attempting to take the elevator to a floor that was apparently off limits. The elevator simply didn't respond to the button. She broke the second rule at 11 by trying to call her friend Keiko from the building lobby, at which point one of Siwon's men appeared beside her, with the polite but absolute energy of a closed door. She retreated to the music room. The piano was a Steinway. Of course it was. She sat down and started playing. Not her set material, but something older. Something she played when she wasn't performing for anyone. A melody she had written when she was 19 and homesick in Paris. It didn't have words. It didn't need them. She played for an hour without stopping. When she finally looked up, she was alone. But on the small screen mounted near the door, the security monitor, she realized, that she'd noticed but dismissed earlier. The indicator light was green. Someone had been watching. She sat with that knowledge for a moment. It should have felt invasive. It didn't. Entirely. which was itself a piece of information she didn't know what to do with. She played for another 20 minutes, slower now, deliberate, and when she finally stood and stretched her fingers, she made a point of not looking at the monitor again. Some things were better left unacknowledged while you figured out what to think about them. 40 floors below and across the city, in a hotel suite paid for in cash, under a name that wasn't his. Marcus Hale poured himself a drink and looked at his phone. The contact was already established. The message had been sent. He had done what was asked of him. He took a slow sip and looked out at Seoul, at the glass and the lights and the distance between him and the woman he had spent 7 months tracking across 2 continents. "She's inside the Jeon household," he said to the man sitting across from him. Yu Kangmin smiled. He was the kind of man who looked like every room he entered had been designed for him, effortlessly, dangerously beautiful, with the particular ease of someone who had never needed to fight for anything, because everything had always simply surrendered. "Perfect," Kangmin said. He picked up his own glass and turned it slowly in his fingers. "The one thing Jeon Siwon has never had," he said, almost to himself, "is something to lose." He looked at Marcus with warm, terrible eyes. "Now he does. You need a dress," Bora said. Zola looked up from the piano. "Good morning to you too. There's an event tonight. Charity Gala. The Lim Foundation." Bora set a tablet on top of the piano, with a photograph of a ballroom that could have comfortably housed a small aircraft. "Mr. Jean will be attending. You'll accompany him. And if I say I'm not a charity gala kind of person, I'd say your wardrobe choices are irrelevant to the matter." Zola looked at the photograph, then at Bora. "I need my instruments." Bora blinked. "This is a gala, not a—" "I know what it is. I'm saying, if I'm going to be paraded around a room full of strangers as someone's ornament, I would like the option of being useful. I perform better when I have something to do with my hands." A pause. Bora seemed to be running calculations. "I'll inquire about the entertainment schedule," she said, and left. The dress they brought her was the color of midnight. Not black, but the deep blue black of the sky just after dark. She stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself in it for a long moment. She looked like she belonged somewhere dangerous. Well, fair enough. The gala was everything the photograph had promised, and slightly more oppressive in person. 200 people in rooms that were designed to make 200 people feel like they were too few. Zola walked beside Siwon through the entrance and felt the room perform the same unconscious rearrangement she had noticed at Club Obsidian. People shifting, creating space, attention tracking him without anyone wanting to be caught looking. "Do they always do that?" she said quietly. "Do what?" he said. "Move out of your way." He glanced at her sidelong. "You noticed that." "Hard not to." He said nothing else. They moved through the room, and he introduced her to exactly 4 people: a foundation chair, 2 government officials, and a man whose name Zola didn't catch, but whose handshake lasted slightly too long, and whose eyes were slightly too interested. Siwon's hand moved to the small of her back during that particular introduction, and stayed there until the man moved away. It was the first time he'd touched her since the kiss. She was very deliberately not thinking about the kiss. She was thinking about it constantly. They were midway through the first course when someone found Bora in the crowd, and there was a brief, quiet conference at the edge of the room. Bora appeared at Zola's elbow. "The scheduled performer has cancelled," she said in a low voice. "The foundation chair is in a moderate panic." Zola looked at her. "I'm not asking," Bora said, which meant she absolutely was. Zola set down her fork, stood, excused herself with a small smile to the table, and went to find the foundation chair. She had no accompanist, no set list, no preparation. She stood at the microphone in front of 200 strangers and felt the particular, clarifying quiet that always came over her just before she sang, the world reducing itself to breath and tone and the space between notes. She sang 4 songs. The last one was the Billie Holiday cover. By the end of the 3rd song, the room had gone completely, perfectly silent. At the end of the 4th, the applause was the kind that started slowly, like people surfacing from water. The foundation chair, a small woman in her 60s who had been on the verge of a visible anxiety spiral 20 minutes earlier, found her at the edge of the stage with tears she was pretending were allergies. "Where did Siwon find you?" she asked, gripping Zola's hand with both of hers. "I found him," Zola said, which was, technically, in the most literal sense, true. The woman laughed and pressed a business card into her hand. Zola looked at it and thought, in another life, in a different 4 months, this is how things would have gone. A performance, a card, a legitimate door opening. She tucked it into her clutch and filed the thought away. She found Siwon when she stepped off the small stage. He was standing with a group of men, mid-conversation, but his eyes had been on her. She felt it, the way you feel a source of heat. And when she met his gaze, something moved across his face, and was gone so fast she might have imagined it. She didn't think she imagined it. "Miss Davis," the voice came from her left. She turned to find a man about Siwon's age, and immediately, instinctively, she understood that this man was the opposite of everything Siwon was. Where Siwon was still, this man moved. Where Siwon was cold, this man radiated warmth. The practiced, particular warmth of someone who had learned that charm was a tool. He was extraordinarily handsome. He knew it. "I don't believe we've been introduced," he said, in perfect English, with a smile that suggested the whole world was a private joke they were both in on. "Yu Kangmin, an old friend of Siwon's." "Zola," she said. "Just Zola?" "For now." He laughed, delighted. "You were magnificent up there. Does Siwon always keep such interesting company?" "You'd have to ask him." "I will." His eyes held hers a moment too long, and then he glanced toward Siwon across the room. Something moved between the two men. Not a greeting. Not quite. A frequency. "Enjoy your evening, Zola." He moved away. She turned to find Siwon standing directly behind her. "How long have you known him?" she asked. "Since we were children," Siwon said. His voice was its usual flat, uninflected calm. "He is not my friend." She looked at his face, looked at the precise, controlled blankness of it. "Noted," she said.
She found the room by accident. She had been exploring the residence. She refused to call it anything else. Residence. Not home. Not Siwon's place on a Tuesday afternoon when the music room felt too small and the Han River view had stopped being distracting. She had gone down a corridor she hadn't tried before, which led to another corridor, which ended in a door that looked the same as every other door except that it had a different kind of lock. She didn't try to open it. She wasn't foolish. But the door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open 6 inches and stopped. It was a small room. Not a bedroom, not an office. More like a place that had been turned into a shrine by accident rather than intention. A desk with nothing on it. A single shelf. and on the shelf, a photograph in a simple frame. A boy of perhaps 12 or 13, in a school uniform, squinting into the sun. Beside him, a woman young, Zola thought, though it was hard to tell, with her arm around his shoulders and a smile that had the quality of something that was going to be remembered for a long time. Zola stood there for a moment, then pulled the door back to where she'd found it. She went to find Bora. "The room at the end of the east corridor," she said. Bora looked up from her desk. Something shifted in her expression, a fraction, a hairline fracture in her composure. "You were in that corridor?" The door was open. It wasn't. It was a few inches open. They looked at each other. "Who is the woman in the photograph?" Zola asked. The hairline fracture closed. Bora's face returned to its default, polished neutrality. "That's not information I'm going to share with you," she said, and went back to her work. Zola returned to the music room and sat at the piano without playing. She was still at the piano at 10 o'clock that night, her fingers moving through something slow and unresolved, when she became aware without hearing footsteps or seeing movement that she was no longer alone. She kept playing. He sat down, not at the piano, but on the bench that ran along the opposite wall, near the window. He didn't speak. He didn't look at her specifically, just sat in the room with the posture of a man who was used to carrying weight alone and had momentarily, inadvertently, set some of it down. She played for another 40 minutes. He didn't leave. When she finally stopped, the silence was the particular kind that has been shared rather than endured. "I'm sorry," she said, without specifying what she was sorry for. "About the room." He didn't answer for a long moment. "It doesn't matter," he said. It clearly did. She didn't push it. She closed the piano lid gently and stood, and said goodnight, and felt the whole way back to her room that she had just stood at the edge of something vast and dark and extraordinarily deep, without being able to see the bottom. Her phone appeared on her pillow one evening, her actual phone, the one she'd had confiscated the first night. Bora left a note beside it, limited access. Emergency contact only. Any other use will be reviewed. She had the phone for 6 hours before Marcus called. She sat looking at his name on the screen for 4 full rings. Then she answered, because not answering felt more dangerous than answering. "I just want to talk," he said. "We're talking," she said. "Zola." His voice had that quality she remembered, the injured softness of it, the particular texture of a man performing his own wounds. "I know how this looks." "How does this look, Marcus?" "Like I'm the villain." A pause. "I know I hurt you. I know that. But what you don't know, what I need you to understand, is that I'm not here on my own. The man you're with, the man whose house you're in, he has connections to people who destroyed my family. My father is in danger." "Your father," she said carefully, "is Raymond Hale." "Yes, Raymond Hale, who runs weapons across West Africa." Silence. "Don't lecture me about danger, Marcus," she said. "Or about families. Zola, if you're in trouble, that's between you and whoever you made deals with. It has nothing to do with me." She paused. "Don't call this number again." She hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand for a long time. She didn't tell anyone. That was the mistake she wouldn't understand until much later. Siwon found out on a Thursday. She didn't know how she suspected Bora, or the phone monitoring, or simply the fact that in this particular world nothing occurred without someone noticing. He appeared in the doorway of the music room in the middle of the afternoon, and she knew from the particular quality of his stillness that something was different. "You received a call," he said. She set her hands in her lap. "Yes. From the man at Club Obsidian." "Yes. And you didn't tell me." "No." She met his gaze. "I didn't." Something passed through his eyes. It wasn't fury, it was colder than fury and more specific. Like something had been confirmed that he'd hoped wouldn't be. "You understand," he said, in that measured, uninflected voice, "that every piece of information in this situation is relevant to every other piece. That you choose to withhold." "I know what I did," she said. "Then why?" "Because it was my phone call." She stood up. "And my problem? And before I walked into your world, I was perfectly capable of managing my own. You were hiding in an underground jazz club in a country where you don't speak the language," he said. Still quiet. Still controlled. That is not managing. That is disappearing. Some of us don't have 53-floor penthouses to disappear into. The silence after that was different from the comfortable silences she had learned to exist in with him. This one had edges. He's not just your ex, Siwon said, after a moment. He's connected to something larger. And you involving yourself in his calls without telling me endangers the entire operation we've been running here. Do you understand that? I understand it, she said. And I also understand that I am not a piece of your operation. I'm a person who is living in your house because I have no other reasonable option right now, not because I surrendered my judgment at the door. I'm not asking you to surrender your judgment. Then what are you asking? Information, he said. That's all. Share what you know and I will share what I know, and we make better decisions together than we make separately. She opened her mouth. Closed it. That was actually a reasonable thing to say. She resented how reasonable it was. Fine, she said. Fine, he said. She picked up her sheet music, tucked it under her arm, and walked toward the door. She was almost through it when he said, very quietly, you're right. She stopped. I don't like not knowing things, he said. Particularly where you are concerned. She didn't turn around. She wasn't ready to turn around and see his face right now because she had a feeling his face would tell her something she wasn't ready to know. Good night, Siwon, she said. She went to her room and lay on the ceiling-facing bed and stared at the ceiling for a very long time. Neither of them slept. It happened at a product launch event for one of the Jeon Syndicate's legitimate business fronts, a tech company in Gangnam, a glass and steel building full of journalists and investors and people who would rather not examine too carefully where money came from. Siwon had brought her because there were 3 rival business interests in attendance, and her presence served the same function it always served: a signal, a statement, a suggestion that Jeon Siwon had something in his life beyond the syndicate, which made him simultaneously more human and more dangerous. She was standing near the canopy table, being studiously uninteresting, when the fire alarm went off. Not a drill. The sprinklers activated on the floor above, sending water cascading down the stairwells, and the ordered event became a controlled chaos of expensive suits and interrupted conversations and PR staff talking rapidly into earpieces. In the reorganization of the crowd, Zola lost sight of Siwon. She didn't panic. She moved toward the exit, calmly, keeping her head up, navigating through the press of bodies, and then a hand closed around her arm, and she spun around with her elbow already moving and a curse already forming. Marcus. Not here, he said, low and fast. Just listen. Let go of me. Kong-in is going to use you to get to Siwon. He's been planning it since the night at the club. I'm trying to warn you. By grabbing me in a crowd? Let go. He did. He stepped back, and she saw something on his face she hadn't seen in the year and a half she'd known him, something that looked like genuine fear. He doesn't care about you, Marcus said. Come in. You're just the variable he needs to destabilize the Jeon Syndicate. If Siwon develops an attachment. Zola. Siwon's voice. Close. She turned and found him 3 feet away, his eyes moving from her face to Marcus with an expression that reduced the ambient temperature of the surrounding area by several degrees. Marcus, to his credit or his survival instinct, had already melted back into the crowd. Siwon looked at her. Are you hurt? He said. Not are you okay? Not what happened. Specific. Direct. No, she said. He looked at her for another moment, then without any discussion or ceremony, he put himself between her and the crowd and walked her out of the building, his shoulder a half step ahead of hers, and she thought about what Marcus had said. If Siwon develops an attachment and found she couldn't look at the back of his neck without feeling something she absolutely could not afford to feel. Outside, in the cool air, she stopped. He was there, she said. Marcus. That wasn't an accident. Kong-min sent him. Siwon said nothing. He was looking out at the street with that carved, unreadable face. You already knew, she said. I suspected. That's not the same as telling me. He looked at her then. And she recognized, with a start, that the thing she'd said to him in the music room, you don't like not knowing things, applied in this direction too. He'd been managing information to protect her. And she wasn't sure whether that made her grateful or furious. Both, she decided. Simultaneously. The way most things with him seemed to work. She told him at 2 a.m, in the kitchen of the penthouse, over tea she had made herself because she hadn't been able to sleep and had come downstairs and found him already there, reading documents at the counter with the focused intensity of a man who apparently didn't require rest like other humans. She made 2 cups without asking whether he wanted one. He accepted it without comment. He moved his documents to make space at the counter, and they stood on opposite sides of it like negotiators who had agreed to a temporary ceasefire. I want to tell you about Marcus, she said. He set his papers down. She told him everything. Not quickly, she took her time, because the truth deserved to be given carefully. She told him about meeting Marcus in London, about the first year that had been good, genuinely good, before things shifted. About the specific, slow way control worked, how it disguised itself as concern and care before it showed its actual face. About the night she decided to leave. About the 3 months it took to actually go, and what those 3 months had cost her. About Paris, and then Accra, and then Seoul, each city another few thousand miles between herself and him. Siwon listened through all of it without interruption, without expression, without moving. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. You don't have to say anything, she said. I just wanted you to know. The full shape of it. He stood, walked to the window, stood with his back to her for a moment. Outside, Seoul hummed its 24-hour hum, indifferent and continuous. No one will touch you again, he said. Quiet. Precise. Final. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't romantic. It landed in the air like a sentence handed down in a courtroom, clean, irreversible, already done. Zola looked at the back of his shoulders and felt something in her chest do something alarming and inconvenient. You can't promise that, she said. I don't make promises, he said. I make decisions. She looked into her mug. There's a difference? He turned around, and the look on his face was the most unguarded she had ever seen it, still contained, still controlled, but underneath the control, something real. Something that had weight to it. Yes, he said. There it. Bora found the leak on a Monday. She came to Siwon with a folder, with Zola present in the room, something that would not have happened 2 months ago, but which apparently no longer seemed to require discussion, and laid out, with her customary clean precision. The evidence that someone in the inner circle had been passing information to the U Empire. How long, Siwon said. At minimum 6 weeks, Bora said. Possibly longer. The summit meeting, Siwon said. They knew we were changing the location. Yes. The Gangnam event. Almost certainly. A pause. Who? Bora looked at her folder. I have 4 names. 2 can be eliminated quickly. She went through the evidence, methodical, thorough. The 3rd name she presented with the particular care of someone who found it deeply unpleasant. The 4th name she didn't say out loud. She slid the folder across the desk toward Siwon, open to the relevant page. Siwon looked at it. He looked at Zola. She looked back at him and felt the thing happening in real time, the doubt, the calculation, the machinery of survival clicking through its options. She watched it cross his face like a weather pattern and then, with what appeared to be genuine effort, stop. No, he said. He pushed the folder back toward Bora. Siwon. No. He looked at Bora. The timeline doesn't support it. Look at the Gangnam event. She was with me when the location was communicated internally. She couldn't have passed it on. Bora looked at Zola. Zola looked at the floor, because the look on Bora's face was complicated, and she wasn't sure she could hold it without her own face doing something revealing. Someone wants her in this position, Siwon said. That's the point. Whoever is feeding information is also feeding suspicion. We don't give them the outcome they want. Bora closed the folder. And if you're wrong? I'm not wrong. Later, in the corridor outside, Bora fell into step beside Zola for a moment, just a moment, not breaking stride. He hasn't been wrong about someone in 4 years, Bora said. Zola said nothing. The last time he was wrong, Bora continued, quietly, it cost him a great deal. She turned down a different corridor and was gone. Zola stood alone in the hallway and thought about a locked room and a photograph on a shelf and the particular way grief looked when it had been lived with long enough to become part of the architecture of a person. She heard it through Daesung. Daesung was a bass player at Club Obsidian, one of the musicians who had known her before Siwon, from her performing days, who occasionally sent her messages about upcoming sessions with an innocence that was probably genuine. He was 23 and had no idea that his connection to her made him a useful conduit for information that moved through Seoul's underground music scene like water through rock. The message came through on a Tuesday afternoon. Heard something weird. Meeting at the Hannum warehouse Thursday midnight. Something about a truce. Thought you'd want to know, since it involves your guy. Your guy. She had not told Daesung anything. She filed that observation away. She sat with the message for an hour. She went over what she knew. Kang-in had been moving toward a confrontation. The mole in the inner circle. The fabricated suspicion. Every piece of it pointed in one direction, not toward a truce, but toward a performance of one. Siwon would walk into that warehouse and walk into a room designed to end him. She had two choices. She could tell him and confess that she had a contact feeding her information she hadn't disclosed and watch the trust they had painstakingly, accidentally built crumble in real time. Or she could say nothing and let him walk into a trap. She found him in his office at 9 in the evening. I need to tell you something, she said. And you're going to be angry, and that's fine, but you need to hear it before you react. He looked up. She told him about Daesung. About the messages, the connection, the information network she'd quietly maintained because she was not, regardless of the circumstances, the kind of woman who stayed in a cage without knowing the shape of the lock. His expression did not change. She told him about the warehouse meeting. About why she was certain it was a setup. When she finished, he was quiet for a very long time. You've been gathering information, he said. Yes. Without telling me. Yes. Using a contact from the outside. Yes. She held his gaze. Someone I trusted. Someone with no connection to any of this. He just moves through the same music circles I used to. He heard things. He passed them on without knowing why they mattered. Another silence. Why are you telling me now? Because you walking into that warehouse is more important than whether you're angry at me, she said. In that order. You realize, he said carefully, that you essentially ran a parallel intelligence operation out of my residence. I prefer to call it staying informed. Something moved across his face. It wasn't quite amusement, but it wasn't not amusement either. It was there for half a second and then gone. That is not better. It kept you alive tonight. I'm going to go ahead and count that as a point in my column. He looked at her for a long time with an expression she couldn't fully read. There were layers to it, and she thought she could identify anger and something else still, but the last layer she couldn't name and wasn't sure she should try. The meeting, he said finally. Tell me everything you know. She did. He walked into the warehouse with a plan instead of a throat. The details of what happened there were not something Zola witnessed. She was back at the penthouse, which was the one condition Siwon had attached to accepting her information, delivered in a tone that did not invite negotiation. She paced the music room for 3 hours, unable to play, checking her phone compulsively, until Bora called to tell her that the meeting had been managed. And Siwon, she asked. Here, his voice said. He must have taken the phone from Bora. I'm here. She sat down on the piano bench and said nothing for a moment. Good, she managed. That's good. I'll be back in an hour, he said. We'll talk. She didn't make it an hour. 40 minutes after the call, she got a message from an unknown number. Come alone. The car park below the building. I just want to talk. She knew it was Marcus. She also knew she should not go. She went anyway. Because she was tired of being managed, tired of being protected, tired of sitting in rooms waiting to hear if people she cared about were still alive, and because some part of her thought that ending it, confronting it directly, might finally be the thing that finished this chapter. Marcus was not there to talk. He grabbed her before she could turn back to the elevator. She fought him. She was not a passive woman, had never been a passive woman, and she was doing reasonably well until he got a hand on her wrist and leveraged her into the car and got the door closed. She spent the next 2 hours applying every ounce of focus she had to getting the zip tie off her wrists, using the rough edge of the door trim. By the time the car stopped, she had it 90% of the way through. The car had stopped in an industrial area south of the river. She didn't know exactly where. She had been tracking turns at approximate time old habit, something her father had taught her before she understood why anyone needed to know such things. She estimated she was 40 minutes from the penthouse, which was useless information given the zip tie situation, but the habit of cataloging was the habit of not panicking, and she needed both. She could hear Marcus on the phone outside the car, his voice low and urgent. Not talking to Kong-in, she thought the tone was wrong. Too defensive. Too much like explaining himself. Trouble in paradise, she thought. Good. When the door opened and Marcus reached for her, she used her legs instead of her hands, hit him hard enough that he stumbled backward and was almost clear when he recovered. The sound of a second car followed. It was Jeon Siwon. He came across the car park not running, walking. His face was, she had never seen his face like this. It wasn't cold. It was gone. Marcus saw him and made a calculation and ran. Siwon stopped in front of Zola. She looked at him. She was bruised at the wrist, her hair was a disaster, and she was still holding the partially severed zip tie. I almost had it, she said. He took her face in both his hands and looked at her, like something had cracked open in him, and the light coming out of it was specifically for her. She didn't pull away. He pressed his forehead against hers, very briefly, and closed his eyes. Neither of them said anything. Marcus was found the next morning. Not by Siwon's people, Kong-min found him first, which was either a coincidence or the end of a very long game becoming visible. What was clear was that Marcus Hale, who had crossed 2 continents and made a deal with the most dangerous man in Seoul, had apparently outlived his usefulness to that man. He was alive. But he was delivering a message by existing in the state he was in. Zola heard about it from Bora. Kong-min is telling Siwon that Marcus was out of control, Bora said. That he acted on his own. That he's willing to discuss terms. And is Siwon believing that? Bora looked at her. What do you think? I think, Zola said slowly, that Kong-in has wanted something from Siwon for a very long time. And that Marcus was never the point. The point was always whatever comes next. Bora looked at her steadily. Yes, she said. That's what we think too. That evening, Siwon came to the music room. Not at midnight, not incidentally, directly, before dinner, with intent. He sat down across from her. I owe you an explanation, he said. You don't owe me anything. I know I don't. He looked at his hands for a moment, an unusually human gesture from him. The room. The photograph. She went still. Her name was Ji-young, he said. She was my mother. A pause. She died when I was 14. The circumstances were connected to the Yu family. A different generation. Kong-min inherited the consequence, as I did. She didn't say she was sorry. It seemed wrong, too small, too borrowed. She said, is that why? Everything, he said. Yes, everything. They sat in the silence of that for a while. This isn't going to end cleanly, he said. What's coming? You should know that. I know that. You could still leave. She looked at him. Really looked at him, at the architecture of restraint and old grief, and something new that she was fairly certain she had built without meaning to. I could, she said. She didn't move. It happened at the annual syndicate business dinner, an event that looked, from the outside, like a legitimate industry gathering and functioned, from the inside, as the place where the various powers of Seoul's underworld took each other's measure. Zola was there as Siwon's companion, as she had been at 6 events before this one. By now she understood the choreography, who to speak to, who to avoid, how to hold a room without appearing to hold it. She had become, without deciding to, competent at this world. Kong-min was there. He found her during the cocktail hour, appearing beside her with his particular brand of warmth that she now understood as weaponized. You look like you belong here, he said. Do I, she said. More than you did 3 months ago. He sipped his drink. How long has it been now? Since the kiss at Club Obsidian. She looked at him steadily. Long enough. He's different with you, Kongin said. Almost gently. I've known Siwon for 20 years, and I have never seen him different with anyone. That must feel significant. What do you want, Kongin? He smiled. Nothing right now. Enjoy your evening. He moved away. She watched him go and felt the chill of a sentence that had more words in it than were spoken aloud. It happened 90 minutes later. Bora appeared at Siwon's elbow with her face arranged in its most controlled configuration, which Zola had learned meant things were worst. A brief exchange, too low to hear. Siwon's expression didn't change. Then the room changed. It started at the edges, a conversation stopping here, heads turning there, phones appearing in hands. Someone connected a phone to the event's display screen. Others followed. On 4 different screens around the room, a video was playing. Zola recognized the footage immediately, a meeting she had seen glimpsed through a half-open door 3 weeks ago, footage of Siwon and 2 other men, the angle making it look like something it wasn't. Someone had edited it. Added context that wasn't there. The closed captions beneath it told a story about a foreign diplomat and an order that had never been given. The room turned toward Siwon. And then Kongmin's voice, from somewhere near the front, calm and carrying. I think it's worth noting as well who has had access to the Jeon household's private information in recent months. He paused. And perhaps asking why. He looked directly at Zola. A woman none of us knew 4 months ago, who appeared, rather conveniently, on the same night contact was first made between the Jeon syndicate and outside interests, who has been present at every significant internal event since. The room followed his eyes. Zola stood completely still. Siwon was at the head of the room. His back was to her. He had been pulled to the front by the eruption of the video, by Bora, by the 3 other syndicate heads who were speaking rapidly and gesturing at the screens. She looked at the back of his head. She waited. He didn't turn around. In the full, crackling silence of the room, with every eye in it moving between the screen and her face, Jeon Siwon stood with his back to Zola Amani Davis and said nothing. She looked at Bora. Bora looked at the floor. She booked the flight at 4 in the morning. London. 7:15. 1 bag. She left without saying goodbye because she knew if she saw his face she wouldn't go, and she needed to go, because staying meant wanting something from a man who had just stood in a room full of people and chosen his syndicate over her. She understood why. That didn't make it hurt less. The airport was quiet at that hour. She found her gate, sat down, and stared at her boarding pass without reading it. You're at the wrong gate. She looked up. Bora sat down beside her, no earpiece, no folder, none of the professional armor. Just a woman who looked like she hadn't slept either. Gate 14 is correct, Zola said. I meant the wrong city. Bora put an envelope on the seat between them. He didn't send me. He doesn't know I'm here. Zola looked at the envelope. Bora, he's in love with you. The words landed in the quiet of the terminal like something dropped from a great height. Zola said nothing. I have worked for Jeon Siwon for 8 years, Bora said. I have never, not once, seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Not since his mother died has anyone gotten past that wall. And last night, when Kongin pointed at you, I watched him make the worst decision of his life, because he calculated that protecting you quietly was safer than defending you loudly. She paused. He was wrong. And he knows he was wrong. And he will never tell you that himself, because telling you means admitting what you are to him. What am I to him? Zola asked. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Everything he didn't plan for. Bora pushed the envelope closer. Open it. Inside was a photograph. Club Obsidian. The stage. A figure alone at a corner table, turned toward the performance. The date stamp was the night before Zola had kissed him. He had been there already. He had watched her perform. He had come back. He had chosen to let her kiss him. He was already there, Zola said. He went 3 nights in a row, Bora said quietly. Before you ever touched him. Zola sat with the photograph in her hands and felt something in her chest crack open slowly. Then why didn't he defend me last night? Because Kongin knew exactly what he was doing. Bora's voice hardened. Pointing at you in that room was a message to Siwon. I know what she means to you. I can use her. If Siwon defended you publicly, it confirmed everything Kongmin wanted confirmed. So he went cold. And it cost him you. She stood. The question is whether you let it. The boarding announcement played overhead. Final call, gate 14. Zola looked at the gate. She looked at the photograph, at the outline of a man sitting alone in a dark club, watching a woman on a stage who didn't know he existed yet. She looked at Bora. He's going to be furious that you came here, Zola said. Absolutely, Bora said. I'm hoping you make it worth it. Across the city, the summit had become a war room. Siwon sat at the head of the table while 4 syndicate heads argued around him, the doctored video playing on a loop on every screen, the accusations stacking like debt. He wasn't listening to the noise. He was thinking about a woman at an airport and whether she was already through the gate. He was thinking about the look on her face when he hadn't turned around. You should have turned around. John. One of the syndicate heads slapped a hand on the table. We need an answer. Right now. You have 24 hours to prove that footage is fabricated or we move against the Jeon Syndicate collectively. Are we understood? Siwon looked at him. 24 hours, Siwon said. Understood. The men filed out. Bora's seat was empty. He'd noticed that an hour ago and said nothing. He knew where she'd gone. He would deal with that later. His phone lit up. A message from a number he didn't recognize. She missed her flight. He stared at the message for a long moment. Then another message came through from the same number, and this one made his blood turn to ice. Since you seem to care, you should know she's not at the airport anymore. Neither am I. K. Siwon was on his feet before the phone finished vibrating. Kongmin had Zola. Kongmin has Zola. Siwon is on his feet. And you are not breathing right now, don't lie. Every answer you thought you had just got flipped. Comment below, did you see Marcus coming? Because I need to know if you caught it or if the ending destroyed you the way it was supposed to. Part 2 is coming. Subscribe, hit the bell, and do not go anywhere. The devil always collects, and we are just getting started. Blackheart.